Claire Whitman had everything: a thriving business, designer clothes, and the kind of success that made others envious. But when she coldly dismissed a humble handyman at a weekend market, calling his beautiful craftsmanship overpriced, she had no idea she was staring into the face of her deepest regret. Marcus Reed recognized those green eyes immediately, the same eyes that had haunted his dreams for 10 years after she vanished without a word. What Claire didn't know was that this quiet man she'd just humiliated was the one person who had truly loved her when she had nothing, and her cruel dismissal was about to unravel everything she thought she knew about love, pride, and second chances. Now, with her polished world about to collide with the authentic life she'd abandoned, Claire must choose between protecting her reputation and fighting for the only man who ever saw her heart. But some mistakes cut so deep that even love might not be enough to heal them. If you're watching this incredible story of love and redemption, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. The early October air felt crisp against Marcus Reed's skin as he lifted another hand-carved jewelry box from his truck. Saturday mornings at the artisan market had become his favorite part of the week. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with cinnamon rolls from the bakery stand. Vendors called out friendly greetings as they set up their displays. "Morning, Marcus," called out Mrs. Chen from the pottery booth next to his. "Beautiful day for it." "Sure is," Marcus replied, arranging his wooden creations on the folding table. Each piece told a story through the grain of the wood: cherry cutting boards smooth as silk, oak picture frames that would last generations, delicate pine jewelry boxes with tiny brass hinges. At 35, Marcus had learned to find joy in simple things. His calloused hands worked with care, placing each item just right. A group of regulars already waited near his stall, knowing he made quality pieces that wouldn't fall apart after a few months. "That's gorgeous work," said Tom Alvarez, the market organizer, stopping by with his clipboard. "You've got a gift, my friend." Marcus smiled. "Just takes time and patience. Most folks don't want to slow down long enough for that anymore." Tom nodded toward the parking area where expensive cars were pulling in. "Speaking of folks in a hurry..." Marcus followed his gaze and saw a sleek black BMW parking between two beat-up pickup trucks. A woman in a cream-colored blazer stepped out, checking her phone and looking around like she'd rather be anywhere else. "First-timer," Marcus said. "Bet she's here for a quick gift and gone in 10 minutes. "Don't judge too fast," Tom warned with a grin. "Sometimes people surprise you." But Marcus had seen this type before. The kind who assumed his prices were too high before asking. The kind who touched his work with one finger like it might be dirty. He'd learned not to take it personally, but it still stung sometimes. The woman, blonde, polished, probably in her early 30s, walked through the market with quick steps. A younger woman with a tablet followed close behind, clearly an assistant of some kind. "Claire, we only have 20 minutes before your conference call," the assistant said. "Claire." Marcus watched her scan the booths with sharp eyes. She had that look of someone used to getting what she wanted fast. They stopped at the jewelry stand first. Claire picked up a silver bracelet, glanced at the price tag, and set it down without a word. The vendor's face fell slightly. Marcus busied himself arranging his cutting boards. He could hear their voices getting closer. "What about something handmade?" the assistant suggested. "More personal that way." "Fine, but nothing that looks amateur," Claire replied. They approached Marcus's booth. Claire's eyes swept over his work, the jewelry boxes with their perfect dovetail joints, the salad bowls curved from single pieces of walnut, the picture frames he'd sanded until they felt like water. She picked up a small jewelry box made from cherry wood. The grain swirled like flames frozen in time. Marcus had spent 12 hours on that piece, getting every curve perfect. "How much?" she asked without looking at him. $75, Marcus said quietly. Claire's eyebrows went up. She set the box down like it had burned her fingers. 75? For this? The words hit Marcus in the chest. It's solid cherry wood, hand-cut joints. I'm sure you did. Claire was already turning away. Come on, Linda. Let's find something reasonable. Marcus felt his face grow warm. Around them, other vendors had gone quiet. Mrs. Chen shot him a sympathetic look. Thank you for looking, Marcus called after them, keeping his voice steady. Claire didn't turn around. Marcus watched her walk away, her heels clicking on the asphalt. He picked up the cherry jewelry box and ran his thumb over the smooth surface. 12 hours of work, dismissed in 12 seconds. Don't let her get to you, Mrs. Chen said softly. Some people don't see value in things that matter. Marcus nodded, but the sting remained. He'd dealt with this before, but somehow today it felt different. Maybe it was the way she'd looked through him like he wasn't even there. A few minutes later, he was helping a regular customer when he caught sight of Claire again. She was at the far end of the market, looking frustrated. Her assistant held up various items, candles, soaps, scarves, but Claire shook her head at each one. Marcus finished his sale and started rearranging his display. As he worked, something nagged at him. Something about the way Claire held herself, the set of her shoulders, the quick, nervous way she checked her phone. When she walked past his booth again, he looked up. Really looked this time. His hands went still on a half-carved bowl. Those eyes, green with flecks of gold around the edges. He'd only known one person with eyes exactly that color. But it couldn't be. That girl had been soft-spoken and kind. She'd worn thrift store clothes and worried about spending $5 on lunch. This woman wore a blazer that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Claire was almost past his booth when Marcus found his voice. Claire? She froze mid-step. Her assistant bumped into her from behind. Excuse me? Claire turned slowly, like she was afraid of what she might see. Marcus stood up slowly from behind his table. His heart hammered against his ribs. Claire Richardson? The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked exactly like the 22-year-old girl who used to sit on his apartment steps when the world felt too heavy to carry alone. It's Whitman now, she said quietly. Claire Whitman. Of course it was. She'd changed her name along with everything else. They stared at each other across the small space between his booth and the walking path. 10 years collapsed into nothing. Marcus could almost smell the cheap coffee they used to share. Could almost hear her quiet voice reading him poems from a beat-up paperback book. Claire started, then stopped. She looked around like she'd forgotten where she was. Ms. Whitman? Linda stepped forward, looking confused. Is everything all right? Claire blinked and seemed to remember herself. The soft expression vanished, replaced by the polished mask she'd been wearing all morning. I'm fine, she said. Just thought I recognized someone. But her hands shook slightly as she smoothed down her blazer. Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Thought she recognized someone? They'd known each other for 8 months. 8 months of long talks and shared dinners and quiet moments that had meant everything to him. We shared a past, Marcus said simply. The words hung in the air between them. Claire's careful composure cracked just a little. She looked at him. Really looked. And he saw something flicker in her green eyes. Memory, maybe. Or regret. That was a long time ago, she said finally. Not that long. They stood there in the middle of the busy market while people flowed around them like water around stones. Vendors called out to customers. Children laughed. Life went on like normal while Marcus's world tilted sideways. Claire had left town 10 years ago without a word. One day she was there, curled up on his couch reading while he worked on a carpentry project. The next day, her apartment was empty and she was gone. He'd never known why. Looking at her now, successful, polished, unreachable, He wondered if he finally understood. "I should go," Claire said. She wasn't looking at him anymore. "Claire." But she was already walking away, her assistant hurrying to keep up. This time, though, she looked back once over her shoulder. Just a quick glance, but it was enough to confirm what Marcus already knew. She remembered him too. Marcus sank down onto the folding chair behind his table. His hands were shaking now. Tom appeared at his side, concern written across his face. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus watched Claire's black BMW pull out of the parking lot. She was talking rapidly on her phone, but even from this distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Something like that," Marcus said. He picked up the cherry jewelry box again. Such a simple thing. Wood and hinges and time. But Claire had looked at it like it was worthless. Just like she'd looked at him. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the market. Marcus went through the motions of helping customers, making change, wrapping purchases in brown paper. But his mind stayed stuck on green eyes and the ghost of a girl who used to trust him with her secrets. By noon, he'd sold 6 pieces. Not bad for a Saturday. But he barely noticed. Every time a car pulled into the lot, he looked up. Every time a blonde woman walked past, his heart jumped. But Claire didn't come back. "She really got to you, didn't she?" Mrs. Chen said as they started packing up. Marcus folded his display table slowly. "We knew each other, before." "Before she became whoever she is now?" Marcus nodded. "She was different then. Softer, kinder." He paused. "Or maybe I just wanted to believe she was." Mrs. Chen touched his arm gently. "People change, Marcus. Sometimes for reasons we never understand." Marcus loaded his truck in silence. As he drove home to his small house on the edge of town, he replayed every moment of their brief encounter. The way Claire's face had gone pale when she heard his voice. The way her hands had shaken. The way she'd said, "That was a long time ago," like she was trying to convince herself it didn't matter. But it did matter. At least to him. That night, Marcus sat on his front porch with a beer and a piece of oak he'd been carving into a small bird. His hands moved automatically, while his mind wandered back 10 years. Claire had been working 2 jobs then. Waitressing at night, office temp work during the day. She'd lived in a tiny studio apartment with a hot plate and a mattress on the floor. But she'd had dreams. Big ones. She'd wanted to start her own business, help people, make a difference. Marcus had been finishing up community college, learning carpentry on the side. They'd met at a diner where she worked the late shift. He'd been there studying, nursing the same cup of coffee for 3 hours, because he was too proud to go home to his empty apartment. She'd kept refilling his cup without being asked. When her shift ended, she'd sat across from him in the booth and asked what he was reading. "Business management," he'd said, feeling stupid. "Probably sounds boring." "Sounds smart," she'd replied. "I'm trying to save up for school myself." That's how it started. Coffee after her shifts, study sessions at his place because it was quieter, long talks about futures that felt possible, and dreams that seemed within reach. For 8 months, they'd built something real together. Not just romance, though there had been that too. Something deeper. Partnership. Understanding. Trust. Then she was gone. Marcus set down his carving and looked up at the stars. He'd spent years wondering what he'd done wrong. Whether he'd pushed too hard or not hard enough. Whether she'd seen something in him that scared her away. Seeing her today, polished and successful and cold, he thought maybe he finally had his answer. He just wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, but Marcus was already loading his truck by 7 a.m. He told himself he wasn't hoping to see Claire again. The market was his livelihood, rain or shine, that's all this was. But his hands shook slightly as he arranged his wooden pieces on the table. The crowd was lighter than usual because of the weather. Vendors huddled under their tents, sipping coffee from paper cups. Marcus kept glancing toward the parking area, then forcing himself to look away. At 10:15, the black BMW pulled up. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Claire sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the market through her windshield. She was alone this time. No assistant, no phone calls, no hurry. When she finally got out, she moved differently. Slower. More careful. Like she was walking towards something that might hurt her. She wore jeans today, and a simple gray sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail instead of the perfect style from yesterday. She looked younger. More like the girl he remembered. Claire wandered through the market for 20 minutes before approaching his booth. Marcus watched her stop at other stalls, buying a small candle here, a bar of soap there. Building up courage, maybe. When she finally stood in front of his table again, neither of them spoke for a moment. "Hi," she said finally. "Hi." She picked up the cherry jewelry box, the same one she'd dismissed yesterday. This time, she turned it over in her hands, running her fingers along the smooth joints. "It really is beautiful work," she said quietly. "Thank you." She set it down carefully. "I was rude yesterday." "I'm sorry." Marcus studied her face. The sharp edges from yesterday had softened. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well. "Apology accepted," he said. Claire nodded and picked up a small picture frame made from maple wood. It was simple, clean lines with a gentle curve at the corners. She traced the edge with one finger. "How much for this one?" $45. She didn't flinch at the price. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out exact change. "I'd like to buy it." Marcus wrapped the frame in brown paper, his movements careful and deliberate. When he handed it to her, their fingers brushed for just a moment. "Marcus?" Claire said, then stopped. She looked around at the other vendors, then back at him. Would you like to get coffee sometime, to talk?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Marcus thought about all the nights he'd wondered where she'd gone. All the questions that had never been answered. All the hurt that had hardened into scar tissue over the years. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." Relief flickered across her face. "There's a coffee shop on Main Street, Brew and Bean. Do you know it?" Marcus nodded. It was the trendy place where lattes cost $6 and everyone worked on laptops. Not his usual spot, but he could manage. "Tomorrow, 6 o'clock? I'll be there." Claire smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face completely, bringing back echoes of the girl who used to laugh at his terrible jokes. "Okay," she said. "I'll see you tomorrow." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Marcus, I really am sorry. About yesterday, and about before." Then she was gone, leaving Marcus standing behind his table with his heart beating too fast and too many questions crowding his mind. The Brew and Bean was exactly as fancy as Marcus had expected. Exposed brick walls, hanging plants, and a menu full of drinks he couldn't pronounce. He arrived 5 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where they could talk without the whole town listening in. Claire walked in at exactly 6 o'clock. She'd changed clothes twice before leaving her apartment. Marcus would learn later. Tonight, she wore dark jeans and a soft blue blouse that brought out her eyes. She ordered a complicated drink with oat milk and cinnamon. Marcus got black coffee. They sat across from each other in silence for a moment, both unsure how to begin a conversation that was 10 years overdue. "You look good," Claire said finally. "Healthy." Marcus almost smiled. "You look successful." "I am." The words came out defensive, then she softened. "I mean, yes, I run my own consulting firm. We help small businesses with marketing strategy. That's great. You always wanted your own company." Claire's eyes widened slightly. "You remember that?" "I remember everything, Claire." The weight of those words settled between them. Claire stared down at her latte, using her spoon to stir patterns in the foam. "I remember too," she whispered. Marcus leaned forward. "Then help me understand. What happened? Why did you leave like that?" Claire was quiet for so long that Marcus wondered if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I got scared." "Of what?" "Of you, of us, of how much I cared about you." She looked up at him then, and he saw the girl he'd fallen in love with hiding behind the successful woman's careful mask. "I was 22, Marcus. I had nothing. You were this steady, reliable person with plans and goals, and I felt like I was drowning most days." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. All these years, he'd thought she left because he wasn't good enough. Because he was just a guy who worked with his hands while she had bigger dreams. "You never said you were struggling." "How could I? You had your own problems. You were working 2 jobs and trying to finish school. I didn't want to be another burden." "You were never a burden." Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I was a mess, Marcus. Panic attacks, debt I couldn't pay, family problems I never told you about. I felt like I was falling apart, and being with you was the only thing that made me feel normal. That scared me more than anything." Marcus reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She didn't pull away. "You could have talked to me. I know that now. But then, I thought if I stayed, I'd just drag you down with me. So when I got the opportunity to move to Chicago for a job, I took it. I told myself it was better for both of us. Without saying goodbye." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I wrote you a letter. 10 different versions. I could never find the right words." They sat there holding hands across a small table in a coffee shop that smelled like vanilla and possibility. Around them, other people lived their normal lives. Students studying, couples on dates, friends catching up. But for Marcus and Claire, the rest of the world had faded away. "I looked for you," Marcus said quietly. "For months. I called hospitals, police stations. I thought something terrible had happened." A tear rolled down Claire's cheek. "I'm so sorry. I didn't think. I was so caught up in my own fear that I didn't think about what it would do to you." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "What happened after you left?" Claire took a shaky breath. "Chicago was hard at first, really hard. But I threw myself into work, made connections, learned everything I could about business. When I had enough experience, I moved back to the state and started my own firm 3 years ago." "And the name change?" "I went back to my mother's maiden name when I moved. Fresh start, I guess." She paused. "I've been back in town for 2 months. I kept meaning to look you up, but I didn't know if you'd want to see me." 2 months? Marcus sat back in his chair. "You've been here for 2 months?" Claire nodded miserably. "I drive past the market every Saturday on my way to the office. I've seen you there. I couldn't bring myself to stop." Marcus felt a mix of emotions, hurt that she'd been so close without reaching out, but also understanding. Some conversations were too big, too important to rush into. "I thought about you too," he admitted. "More than I should have, probably." "Did you—" Claire hesitated. "Did you ever get married? Have kids?" "No. Came close once, about 5 years ago. But it didn't work out." "I'm sorry." Marcus shrugged. "What about you?" "No. There was someone in Chicago for a while, but..." She trailed off. "It wasn't real. Not like what we had." The admission hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. "Claire," Marcus said carefully, "what are we doing here? What do you want from this?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the evening traffic. "I don't know," she said finally. "I just know that seeing you yesterday brought back feelings I thought I'd buried." and I realized that running away 10 years ago was the biggest mistake of my life. Marcus felt his heart speed up. So what now? I don't know that either. I just know I don't want to run away again. They talked for 2 more hours. About safe things mostly. His carpentry business, her consulting firm, changes in the town, mutual acquaintances they'd both kept track of over the years. But underneath the casual conversation, something deeper was building. A recognition of the people they'd become, and the history they shared. When they finally left the coffee shop, the sun had set, and the street lamps were flickering on. They walked slowly to their cars, neither wanting the evening to end. "Thank you," Claire said as they reached her BMW, "for giving me a chance to explain. Thank you for explaining." They stood there in the parking lot, caught between the past and whatever might come next. "Would you like to have dinner this week?" Claire asked. "Somewhere quieter, where we can really talk." Marcus nodded. "I'd like that. Wednesday? 7 o'clock. There's a little Italian place on Oak Street. Marcello's. I'll be there." Claire smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I'm glad you're willing to try this, Marcus. I know I don't deserve another chance, but—" "Everyone deserves another chance," Marcus said gently. "The question is what we do with it." As he drove home that night, Marcus thought about the girl Claire had been and the woman she'd become. She'd been broken then, lost and scared and trying to find her way. Now she was successful, confident, in control of her life. But underneath all that polish, he'd caught glimpses tonight of the person he'd fallen in love with 10 years ago. The same kindness in her eyes, the same way she listened when he talked. The same small smile that started at one corner of her mouth. Maybe people didn't really change. Maybe they just learned to hide the parts of themselves that felt too vulnerable to show. Marcus pulled into his driveway and sat in his truck for a moment, looking at the small house he'd bought 3 years ago. It was nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a workshop in the garage. But it was his. For the first time in years, he wondered what it might feel like to share it with someone again. Wednesday evening, Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his collar for the 3rd time. He'd chosen a simple button-down shirt and his best jeans. Nothing too fancy, but clean and presentable. His hands were steady now, the nervous energy from Monday's coffee meeting replaced by something warmer. Hope, maybe. Marcello's was a small family restaurant with checkered tablecloths and soft lighting. The kind of place where conversations could happen without interruption. Marcus arrived first and chose a corner table, watching the door. Claire walked in at exactly 7 o'clock, and Marcus felt his breath catch. She wore a simple black dress that somehow made her look both elegant and approachable. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she'd traded her business heels for flat shoes. "Hi," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Hi yourself." The waiter brought menus and took their drink orders. Wine for Claire, beer for Marcus. They talked easily while deciding on food, falling into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. "Tell me about your business," Claire said after they'd ordered. "When did you decide to go full-time with the woodworking?" Marcus smiled. "About 6 years ago. I was still doing construction during the day and making furniture at night, getting maybe 4 hours of sleep. Finally realized I was going to kill myself trying to do both. That must have been scary, giving up the steady paycheck." "Terrifying," Marcus admitted. "But I had enough regular customers by then, and Tom, he runs the market, he convinced me there was demand for quality handmade stuff. People were tired of furniture that falls apart after 2 years. Claire nodded. "I know what you mean. Everything's so disposable now. What about you? Starting your own firm couldn't have been easy either." Claire's expression grew thoughtful. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. The first year I lived on ramen noodles and slept on an air mattress. But I was determined to prove I could do it." "Prove it to who?" The question seemed to catch Claire off guard. She took a sip of wine, buying time. To myself, I guess. To everyone who said I was crazy for leaving a good job in Chicago. Marcus sensed there was more to it, but he didn't push. They had time. Their food arrived, and the conversation turned to lighter topics. Claire asked about his house, his workshop, the other vendors at the market. Marcus told her about Mrs. Chen's pottery classes, and Tom's terrible dad jokes, and the regular customers who had become like family. "It sounds wonderful," Claire said, and there was something wistful in her voice. "What about you? Do you like what you do?" Claire paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. "I'm good at it. I help small businesses succeed. That feels meaningful." Marcus noticed she hadn't answered the question he'd actually asked, but again, he let it slide. After dinner, they walked through downtown, past shops closing for the evening and cafes where people lingered over late dinners. The October air was crisp but not cold, perfect for a slow stroll. "Remember when we used to walk around the college campus?" Claire said suddenly. "You'd point out different types of trees and tell me how their wood would work for furniture." Marcus laughed. "I can't believe you remember that. I thought I was boring you to death." "Are you kidding? I loved it. You saw possibilities in everything. A broken branch could become a jewelry box. An old fence post could become a picture frame." She paused. "You still see the world that way, don't you?" "I guess so. Why?" "It's a gift. Most people just see trash or obstacles. You see potential." They stopped walking. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the soft buzz of streetlights. Claire looked up at him, and in the amber light, she looked exactly like the girl he'd fallen in love with 10 years ago. "Marcus," she said softly, "I want you to know that these past few days, talking with you again, it feels like coming home." Before he could respond, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. Soft and tentative at first, then deeper when he didn't pull away. Marcus felt 10 years of questions and hurt and longing melt into this one perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, Claire rested her forehead against his chest. "I've wanted to do that since Monday," she whispered. "Just since Monday?" Marcus asked, his arms around her waist. She laughed. "Well, maybe a little longer than that." They stood there holding each other on an empty sidewalk, both afraid to move and break the spell. "I should probably get you home," Marcus said finally, though he made no move to let her go. "Probably," Claire agreed, but she didn't step back either. Eventually, they walked to where they'd parked their cars. At Claire's BMW, Marcus hesitated. "Would you like to come over for dinner this weekend?" he asked. "Nothing fancy. I could cook for you." Claire's smile lit up her whole face. "I'd love that." "Saturday? Around 6? "Perfect." She kissed him again, quick and sweet this time, then got in her car. Marcus watched her drive away, then stood in the parking lot for a few more minutes, replaying the evening in his mind. Saturday morning, Marcus cleaned his house from top to bottom, then drove to the grocery store to buy ingredients for dinner. He'd decided to keep it simple: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a salad. Food that wouldn't require his constant attention so he could focus on Claire. He spent the afternoon in his workshop, putting finishing touches on a coffee table he'd been crafting from reclaimed barnwood. The repetitive motion of sanding helped calm his nerves. At 5:30, he showered and changed into clean jeans and a blue shirt Claire had complimented at the restaurant. He was just putting the chicken on the grill when her car pulled into his driveway. Claire stepped out wearing a sundress in soft yellow that made her hair look golden in the early evening light. She carried a bottle of wine and a small gift bag. "Wow," she said, looking at his house. "This is perfect, Marcus. It's so... you." Marcus felt a flush of pride. The house was small, but he'd restored it carefully over the past 3 years. The front porch had new railings he'd built himself. The garden was simple but well tended. Nothing fancy, but everything done with care. "Thank you," he said, taking the wine from her hands. "Come on, let me show you around." They toured the house slowly. Claire admired the hardwood floors he'd refinished, the kitchen cabinets he'd rebuilt, the stone fireplace he'd repointed brick by brick. Everything showed his attention to detail and craftsmanship. "It's beautiful," Claire said when they reached his workshop in the converted garage. She ran her hands over his workbench, examining the carefully organized tools. "Look at all this." Marcus watched her take in his space. The half-finished projects, the stacks of different wood species, the sketches pinned to a bulletin board. This was where he was most himself, and having her here felt both natural and terrifying. "What's this going to be?" she asked, pointing to the coffee table he'd been sanding. "Coffee table. The wood came from a barn that was torn down last year. I'm trying to preserve some of its character while making it functional." Claire traced the grain with one finger, the same way she'd touched his work at the market. "It's going to be gorgeous." They went back inside to finish making dinner. Claire insisted on helping, so Marcus put her in charge of the salad while he watched the grill. They moved around his small kitchen easily, passing each other with casual touches. A hand on a waist, fingers brushing while reaching for plates. "This feels nice," Claire said as they worked together. "What does?" "This. Cooking together. Being normal." She paused. "I don't get to be normal very often anymore." Marcus looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" Claire shrugged, focusing intently on chopping tomatoes. "My life is very structured. Business meetings, client dinners, networking events. Everything has a purpose and a goal. This is the first time in years I've just existed, without an agenda." "That sounds lonely." "It is, sometimes. But it's what success requires." Marcus thought about that while he turned the chicken. Success to him meant being able to pay his bills doing work he loved. Having friends at the market, coming home to a place that felt like sanctuary. Different definitions, maybe. Dinner was perfect. They ate on his small back deck, surrounded by the vegetables and herbs he grew in raised beds. Claire told him about her consulting work, the challenges of building a business from nothing, the satisfaction of helping small companies thrive. Marcus shared stories from the market, the regular customers who'd become friends, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with his hands. "Do you ever miss the corporate world?" Marcus asked as they cleared the dishes. "Sometimes I miss the security of a steady paycheck. But I don't miss the politics or the pressure to be someone I'm not." Claire paused. "Actually, that's not true. I still feel pressure to be someone I'm not. It's just self-imposed now." Marcus wanted to ask what she meant, but Claire's phone rang. She glanced at it, and her whole demeanor changed. "I'm sorry. I have to take this," she said, stepping inside. Marcus could hear her voice through the screen door. Professional, clipped, completely different from the woman who'd been laughing with him moments before. When she returned 10 minutes later, she looked tired. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked. "Fine. Just a client emergency. Nothing that couldn't wait until Monday, but they don't know that." Marcus nodded, but something felt different now. Claire seemed distant, distracted, like part of her had left with that phone call. They sat on his porch swing as the sun set, Claire tucked against his side. It should have been perfect, but Marcus could feel her tension. "Claire," he said softly, "you can relax here. You don't have to be anyone but yourself." She looked up at him with an expression he couldn't read. "What if you don't like who I really am? I already know who you really are." "Do you?" "I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, Marcus. I'm harder now, more guarded. I've had to be." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "We've all changed. That doesn't mean the core of who you are is different." Claire was quiet for a long moment. "I hope you're right," she whispered. As if summoned by her words, a car pulled into the driveway. Claire tensed immediately. "Expecting someone?" she asked. Marcus shook his head, standing up to see who it was. A silver Mercedes, not a car he recognized. The driver's door opened, and a tall woman with short dark hair stepped out. She was about Claire's age, dressed in expensive clothes and an annoyed expression. "Rachel," Claire said under her breath, and Marcus heard something like dread in her voice. The woman, Rachel, walked up to the porch with confident strides. Her eyes swept over Marcus dismissively before focusing on Claire. "There you are," Rachel said. "I've been calling you for hours. When you didn't answer, Linda told me you might be here." Claire stood up slowly. "Rachel, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk about the Morrison account. They're threatening to walk if we don't present new concepts by Monday." Marcus could see the wheels turning in Rachel's head as she looked between him and Claire, taking in the intimate setting, the wine glasses, the way Claire's hair was mussed from sitting against his shoulder. "I see," Rachel said coolly. "You're busy." The way she said busy made it sound like something distasteful. Claire's posture changed, becoming straighter, more defensive. "Rachel, this is Marcus. Marcus, this is Rachel Moore, my business partner." Rachel extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Charmed," she said in a tone that suggested the opposite. Marcus shook her hand briefly. "Nice to meet you." "Marcus has a craft business," Rachel continued, looking around at his modest house and garden. "How quaint." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but before he could respond, Claire spoke up. "Marcus is a master craftsman. His work is beautiful." But there was something defensive in Claire's voice too, like she was making excuses, like she was embarrassed. "I'm sure it is," Rachel said smoothly. "But Claire, we really need to focus on the Morrison situation. This could cost us the account." Marcus watched Claire's face as she processed this. He could see the internal struggle, the woman who'd been relaxing in his arms moments ago, warring with the successful businesswoman who couldn't afford to lose clients. The businesswoman won. "You're right," Claire said, standing up and smoothing down her dress. "Let me get my purse." She went inside, leaving Marcus alone on the porch with Rachel. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Rachel decided to break it. "You seem nice," she said, but her tone suggested anything but genuine warmth. "But I hope you understand that Claire has worked very hard to build her reputation. She can't afford distractions." The word hit Marcus like a slap. Distraction. Is that what he was? "I would never want to hurt Claire's business," he said carefully. "I'm sure you wouldn't. Intentionally." Rachel smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's just that people talk, you know, and appearances matter in our industry." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What exactly are you trying to say?" "I'm not trying to say anything. I'm saying it directly. Claire has spent years building her credibility, dating someone in her social circle. Makes sense. Dating a handyman sends a different message." Before Marcus could respond, Claire emerged with her purse, her phone already in her hand. "I'm sorry," she said to Marcus, but she wouldn't quite meet his eyes. "This really is urgent." Marcus stood up. "I understand." But he didn't really. Urgent enough to abandon a romantic evening? Urgent enough to let her business partner insult him without comment? Claire kissed him quickly on the cheek. A polite gesture, nothing like the passionate kiss they'd shared earlier. "I'll call you," she said. Then she was gone, following Rachel to the Mercedes. Marcus watched them drive away, feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. He stood on his porch for a long time after they left, replaying the conversation in his mind. Rachel's words echoed. Dating a handyman sends a different message. Marcus had worked hard to build his business, to earn respect in the community. But apparently in some circles, that wasn't enough. He was still just a guy who worked with his hands. Not sophisticated enough for a successful businesswoman. The worst part wasn't Rachel's obvious disdain. The worst part was that Claire hadn't defended him. Not really. She'd offered a weak comment about his craftsmanship, then immediately agreed to leave with Rachel. Marcus went inside and cleaned up the dinner dishes, trying not to think about how perfectly the evening had been going before that phone call, before Rachel's arrival, before Claire remembered that she had a reputation to protect. He told himself he was overreacting, that Claire had been put in a difficult position, that she really did have a business emergency. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just gotten a glimpse of something he didn't want to see. The part of Claire's new life that had no room for someone like him. The part that saw him as a distraction. 3 days passed without a word from Claire. Marcus threw himself into his work, spending long hours in his workshop sanding and staining until his hands ached. But no amount of physical labor could quiet the voice in his head replaying Rachel's words. Dating a handyman sends a different message. Wednesday evening, his phone finally rang. Claire's name appeared on the screen. Hello, he answered, trying to keep his voice neutral. Marcus, hi. I'm so sorry I haven't called. This Morrison thing has been a nightmare, and Rachel's been breathing down my neck about every detail. Marcus set down the piece of oak he'd been carving. How did it go? We saved the account, barely, but we did it. She paused. I know Saturday ended badly. I felt terrible about leaving like that. It's okay. Work is work. But something in his tone must have given him away, because Claire's voice grew softer. No, it's not okay. Can we talk? In person? Marcus looked around his workshop at the half-finished projects scattered everywhere. Running away into his work hadn't helped. Maybe facing this head-on would. Sure, when? Now. I could come over, or we could meet somewhere. Come over, Marcus said. I'll be in the workshop. 20 minutes later, Claire knocked on the side door that led directly to his garage. She looked tired, still wearing a business suit from what had probably been a long day of meetings. Hi, she said softly. Hi yourself. She looked around the workshop, taking in the controlled chaos of his current projects. You've been busy. Helps me think. Claire picked up a small wooden bowl he'd been turning on his lathe. This is beautiful. The grain pattern is incredible. Cherry wood, from a tree that came down in the storm last month. They stood there making small talk about wood and tools, both avoiding the real conversation. Finally, Claire set down the bowl and looked at him directly. I owe you an apology. A real one. Marcus leaned against his workbench. For what? For Saturday night. For leaving the way I did. For not. She struggled with the words. For not standing up for you when Rachel was being rude. So she had noticed. Marcus felt a small measure of relief that he hadn't imagined the tension. She was protecting your business interests, Marcus said carefully. I get that. Claire's laugh was bitter. No, she was being a snob, and I let her. Why? The simple question hung between them. Claire walked over to his tool wall, running her fingers along the handles of chisels and planes he'd collected over the years. Because I've spent 10 years building walls, she said quietly. Walls between who I used to be and who I needed to become to succeed. And sometimes I forget which side of those walls I want to be on. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Claire, let me finish, she said, turning to face him. When I left town 10 years ago, I was broken, scared, poor. I felt like I was drowning, and I thought the only way to survive was to become someone completely different. Someone stronger. Someone who couldn't be hurt. And she paused, her eyes bright with unshed tears. It worked. I built a successful business. I have money in the bank and a nice apartment and respect in my industry. But somewhere along the way, I lost track of who I really am. Until I saw you at the market last weekend. Marcus stayed quiet, sensing there was more. Being with you these past few days, I remembered what it felt like to just exist, without performing or proving myself or maintaining an image. You see me the way you always did, as someone worth caring about, just as I am. Because you are, Marcus said simply. Claire wiped at her eyes. Rachel doesn't understand that. She sees everything through the lens of business advantage. And Saturday night, when she showed up and started talking about reputation and appearances, I panicked. I fell back into the armor I've been wearing for 10 years. Marcus pushed off from the workbench and moved closer to her. What are you saying, Claire? I'm saying I have a choice to make. I can keep living behind those walls, protecting the image I've built, staying safe but alone. Or I can tear them down and risk everything for something real. What do you want to do? Claire looked up at him, and for a moment she was 22 again. Vulnerable and uncertain, but brave enough to hope. I want to choose you, she whispered. I want to choose us. But I'm scared, Marcus. What if I can't change? What if I'm too damaged by the person I've had to become? Marcus reached out and cupped her face in his hands. His calloused palms were rough against her soft skin, but she leaned into the touch. You don't have to change, he said. You just have to remember who you were before you decided you weren't enough. Tears spilled over then, and Claire fell against his chest. Marcus wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried for the girl she'd buried and the years they'd lost. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry I left. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I almost made the same mistake twice. Marcus kissed the top of her head. We're here now. That's what matters. They held each other in the workshop, surrounded by the smell of wood shavings and linseed oil. Outside, the October wind rattled the garage door, but inside, something that had been broken was finally beginning to heal. What happens now? Claire asked eventually. Marcus pulled back to look at her. Now you decide what kind of life you want to live, and who you want to live it with. Claire nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I want to live it with you, but there are things I need to handle first, starting with Rachel. What do you mean? Claire's expression grew determined. I mean, it's time I remembered that I'm the senior partner in this firm, and it's time Rachel learned that my personal life is not a business decision. Marcus felt a surge of pride watching Claire find her backbone again. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with. Not the polished businesswoman or the scared girl, but the fighter who'd always been underneath. Are you sure? She seemed pretty invested in managing your image. She's invested in protecting her own position, Claire said firmly. But I built this company, me, and if she can't respect the person who gave her a career, then maybe it's time for her to find a new one. They talked for another hour, making tentative plans for the future. Claire would have the conversation with Rachel. They would take things slow, rebuilding trust one day at a time. Marcus would be patient while Claire figured out how to integrate her old self with her new life. As Claire was leaving, she turned back at the workshop door. Marcus, the night I left 10 years ago, I did write you a letter. I never sent it, but I wrote it. What did it say? Claire smiled through her tears. It said that loving you was the only thing I'd ever done that felt completely right, and that leaving you was the only way I knew to keep from ruining it. And now? Now I know that love isn't something you protect by running away from it. It's something you protect by staying and fighting for it. After Claire left, Marcus sat in his workshop for a long time, turning a piece of maple in his hands. The wood was flawed. A knot ran through the center that most people would see as damage. But Marcus could see how to work with that flaw, how to make it part of the beauty instead of trying to hide it. Maybe that's what love was. Not finding someone perfect, but finding someone whose flaws fit with yours. Someone willing to do the hard work of becoming whole together. Saturday morning at the market, Marcus was arranging his display when Tom walked over with coffee and a curious expression. "You've seemed different this week," Tom observed. "Good different. What's going on?" Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. "Remember that woman from a couple weeks ago? The one who was rude about my prices? The blonde in the fancy clothes? What about her? We have history, and maybe a future." Tom raised his eyebrows. "That's quite a development. She apologized for being snooty?" "Among other things." Before Tom could ask for details, Marcus spotted Claire's car pulling into the parking lot. But this time, she wasn't alone. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, and even from a distance, Marcus could see the tension between them. They got out of the car and walked through the market together. Rachel looked around with barely concealed disdain at the modest booths and casual atmosphere. Claire, on the other hand, smiled and waved at vendors she'd met the previous week. When they reached Marcus's booth, Claire's smile was warm but nervous. "Good morning," she said. "Morning, Rachel." Marcus nodded politely to Claire's business partner. "Marcus," Rachel replied coolly. Claire took a deep breath. "Marcus, I wanted Rachel to see your work properly. She's never really had a chance to appreciate handcrafted furniture." Rachel's expression suggested she had no interest in appreciating anything, but she dutifully examined the pieces on Marcus's table. "This is quite nice," she said finally, picking up a small jewelry box. "Very rustic." Marcus bit back his first response. Rustic wasn't exactly a compliment in Rachel's vocabulary. "It's functional art," Claire said firmly. "Each piece is unique. You can't get this quality from a factory." Rachel set down the jewelry box. "Of course. I'm sure there's a market for this sort of thing." The dismissive tone was exactly what Marcus expected, but Claire's reaction surprised him. Instead of letting it slide, she turned to face Rachel directly. "Rachel, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Without waiting for an answer, Claire walked a few steps away from the booth. Rachel followed, clearly reluctant. Marcus couldn't hear their conversation, but he could see Claire's body language. Straight spine, direct eye contact, no backing down. After 5 minutes, they returned. Rachel looked subdued, while Claire looked determined. "I apologize," Rachel said to Marcus, though the words sounded forced. "I was dismissive of your work, and that was unprofessional." Marcus nodded. "Thank you." "Rachel's going to head back to the office," Claire announced. "She has some calls to make about restructuring our partnership agreement." The look that passed between the two women suggested this was not a voluntary decision on Rachel's part. Rachel gathered her purse and walked back toward the parking lot without another word. Claire watched her go, then turned back to Marcus. "That went better than I expected." "What did you say to her?" "I reminded her that I own 60% of the company and make the final decisions about all partnerships, business and personal." Claire's smile was small but satisfied. "I also suggested that if she couldn't work with my choices, she was welcome to find a position elsewhere." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the steel in Claire's voice. And she decided she could learn to be more flexible in her attitudes. Tom, who'd been pretending to organize his own booth while obviously listening, let out a low whistle. "Remind me not to get on your bad side," he said to Claire. Claire laughed, and the sound was lighter than Marcus had heard since they'd reconnected. "I don't have a bad side. I just have boundaries now." Over the next few hours, Claire stayed at the market, helping Marcus with customers and chatting with the other vendors. Mrs. Chen taught her about pottery glazes. The bakery couple insisted she try their new apple cinnamon scones. By afternoon, she'd been adopted by the entire Market family. "They love you," Marcus observed as they packed up his booth. "They're wonderful. I'd forgotten how nice it is to be around people who don't want anything from you except friendship." Marcus loaded his truck while Claire said goodbye to her new friends. Watching her laugh with Mrs. Chen about a lopsided pottery bowl she'd attempted to make, Marcus felt something settle in his chest. This was Claire, without walls, without armor. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, finally ready to stay. As the sun began to set, they sat on Marcus's front porch with glasses of iced tea, watching his garden soak up the last golden light of the day. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. Claire took his hand in hers. "Now we do the work. The real work of figuring out how to build something together. It won't always be easy. I know. I'm still going to have bad days when I forget that success doesn't mean being perfect. You're probably going to get tired of my neuroses about business meetings and client presentations." Marcus squeezed her hand. "And you're going to have to deal with me getting sawdust on everything and talking about wood grain patterns way too much." Claire smiled. "I like your sawdust. And your wood grain patterns." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about the future they were choosing to build together. "Marcus?" Claire said eventually. "Yeah, remember that letter I told you about? The one I wrote but never sent?" Marcus nodded. There was something else in it, something I was too scared to say out loud back then. "What?" Claire turned to face him fully, her green eyes serious and clear. "I wrote that I loved you. Past tense, like it was something that had already ended. But the truth was, I loved you present tense. I loved you in a way that scared me because I didn't know how to trust something that good." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "And now? Now I love you in future tense. I love you in a way that makes me want to be brave enough to stay." Marcus leaned forward and kissed her. Soft and sure and full of promises they were finally ready to make. When they broke apart, Claire rested her forehead against his. "I choose this," she whispered. "I choose us. I choose the life we can build together, sawdust and all." Marcus pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair and the sweet October air. "I choose us too," he said. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, integrating their different worlds, learning to trust completely, figuring out the practical details of building a life together. But tonight, sitting on a front porch that finally felt like home to both of them, surrounded by the quiet garden and the distant sounds of a town settling in for evening, Marcus and Claire held each other and chose love over fear. It was, they both knew, the beginning of something real, something that would last.